All right. We got with us Duncan Echelson. Did I get that right?
Got that right.
There you go. I had some practice there. Duncan, thank you
We're off,
so
we're
much
off to a
for
good start there.
thank you so much for joining me. I've had the pleasure of talking with you a few times through Jerry. And man,
Hmm.
anytime I get to hear you speak, it's just like, okay, I just want to listen because you have such a calm, you have such a presence when you speak. Have you always been that way?
Not always at all times, no. I have my moments of panic and anxiety and all that stuff.
Yes. As do I. I definitely get that. So, who would you say influenced you the most growing up in your life?
Well, it's an interesting thing because actually I'm influenced by a combination of my mother and my father because they were very different people.
Hmm.
Kind of culturally extremely different. Met during World War II in Denver, Colorado, and for unknown reasons, um, got married. And so, they had a close relationship in some ways, but they didn't agree on much.
Hmm.
So that kind of hearing them arguing about a multitude of things kind of gave me permission to try out and make up my own mind.
Right.
And
So,
they
because
were
they're
kind of, mhm.
no, go ahead.
Well, they were kind of high stress people and took many things really seriously. And so that didn't strike me as a particularly good strategy. I never saw it as actually accomplishing anything good.
Hmm.
So I decided I didn't want to do that.
So, growing up, you saw how your parents would solve problems or respond to, say, stressors in the
Mhm.
environment as not agreeing.
Well, I mean, they agreed in the sense that they would both tend to get overly excited about too many things,
Hmm. Hmm.
take too many things too seriously.
So, growing up, was it calm with your parents? Would you say?
No,
Or the at yeah, okay. So, but when you had kids, were you calm with them? Like, did you look at that and you're like, okay, so this is my experience. I want to try it very differently this time.
well, of course, all parents have that conceit that
Conceit.
they're going to overcome their parents' parenting problems. But it never quite works out that way because marriage itself uh, is a good way to get ourselves into a similar situation.
Mm. What do you mean by that?
We tend to pick our parents to marry, and so because we have all these things, we have all these things we still need to work out.
Right.
But we don't realize that that's what we've done to ourselves.
You dropped one of like the most sagacious. You'll notice I like to use big words like incorrectly.
Yeah,
Very,
yeah, right,
very
right.
I speak Finneganese, meaning that I get the words wrong. But you said this one thing of when we have, I think it's words to the effect of, we are children when we have children, right? So
Yes.
as we're raising children, we're coming out of being children. Like that's the real, like, my 20s, because I had all this new freedom, I was just a kid all over again. I was doing dumb
Mhm.
shit left, right, and center. Now that I have kids, I'm like, now it's not just abstract, right? Like, oh, I need to do
Right,
better. Like
right.
that's an abstraction. Now I
That's an
realize,
abstraction.
yeah, now I realize, man, I need to do better because I am setting an example here for this little person. So when we have children, that's when we what was that line again? It's something words to the effect of when we have children, that's when we stop being children. Something like that.
I think that's probably your interpretation of something
That
else. So
yes.
what I usually say is when we have children, we learn to forgive our own parents.
Mm, yeah, that's true.
Because we begin to realize what a task it is, and we begin to realize that they were doing the best they could.
Yes.
That should always be the assumption in dealing with people, no matter how weird and foolish they may act. They're doing the best they can under the circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
from where they come from and where they are right now. They're doing the best they can for the most part. Now it gets a little frustrating because, of course, we all have the answer for how other people should behave.
Yes.
And uh, sometimes we have the temerity to make suggestions to other people. And then, when they're unable or just outright reject our suggestions, we get upset about it.
What's the matter with them?
Yeah, what, here
Yeah.
I'm telling them exactly, you know. So so you know, between you and me, the benefit of having children is to realize how little effect we have,
Oh, right.
and that we do ourselves and our children damage when we think that they should listen to us and do what we say. Now, a certain amount of that is actually true, but it's a modest amount.
Mm.
Okay.
What here's the other thing that I've kind of noticed in my own observations of my own parenting is that my daughter is not me. So maybe the things that I would have wanted or that I thought I needed when I was a kid are not the same needs or requisitions that my daughter has. I've talked to some parents, and that does seem to be a similar hiccup that some of us have, is that
Yeah.
we think that our kids want the same things that we want, and we're trying to give them that deficit. But our kids aren't.
Right, right. We're trying to make
They,
up for what we didn't get,
yes,
uh, and the dreams that we had and still have. Yeah, that's a common fallacy.
do you now your kids, you have kids, they're older,
Great,
3.
great.
What's the antidote for young parents to that? Do you have any unsolicited suggestions for that? How do we get
Um,
over ourselves, I think, is almost the question.
well, I mean, the task of life is to find out who we are, and the way that you find out that is actually learning to observe what we do. I mean, we all have this our own personal Ten Commandments sort of thing.
Right.
I should
Right.
I should do this. I should do this. And we take it very seriously. So seriously that we don't always accurately observe what we actually do.
Mm.
So that's a really big one, to be able to observe ourselves. My grandmother told me something. She was a really nice old East Texas woman, and she told me, I think I was about 15 years old, and she said, Duncan, she said, I want you to. We would always take buses to go downtown. She lived she lived in the outside of downtown Dallas, Texas, and we would take buses. That was considered much easier than driving a car downtown.
Because Dallas is much more metropolitan than people realize.
Well, now it is. Now it's ridiculously metropolitan.
Right.
Back in those days, she actually lived on a dirt road. Um, and it wasn't until I was in my teens that I think it was my teens that they paved the road. So when they originally had their house, they were kind of out in the country, but it was, countryside, very accessible to downtown because Dallas had a fairly good bus system, actually, shockingly good for an American city. And so I think we could go and walk out to the highway and catch a bus and be downtown in 20 minutes. But anyway, that's an aside. She said, I want you to go someday. I want you to go over and get on the bus. And I want you to go a couple of stops and get off the bus. And I'm going to take the next bus because I want to see what you look like as a stranger getting on the bus.
Okay.
And I thought, that's pretty interesting. And I think that she was on to something there. So, because usually we're so close to particularly our children that we have difficulty seeing them as other people.
So your grandmother wanted to see you as a person outside of her proximity, your proximity to her, because we
tend to be rather
behavior. Oh man, I shaped so much of my behavior in front of my parents. They thought I was like super innocent, right?
Well, of course, I mean, and you're going to experience that yourself.
I
mean, I'm sure
much to my chagrin,
you're going to be such a cool parent that they're going to tell you everything. And let me tell you, forget it.
Right.
Pretty, that's just the way that it is.
Do your kids still shape their behavior for you?
Not much.
How does that make you feel?
Oh, it's fine. Actually, I like that. I like that. And I'm actually at a stage where I'm pretty much able to give up being the parent. Actually, we went, Kimi's my girlfriend, who I've been hanging out with quite a bit of time for the last 5 years, going on 6 years. And we went to Thanksgiving at my son's house.
Right.
And basically, I mean, we contributed some stuff, but he contributed the main thing. And, and then my daughter, I have 2 children here in town, brought a lot of the stuff. And, that was fine. Basically, all I had to do was show up and eat and behave myself somewhat.
Right now, I have to exhibit the illusion of control for my daughter, right? It has to seem like I got everything, right? Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Meanwhile, the world's melting, right? But, sorry. And, there's all this crazy stuff going on, but you have to pretend like everything's under control. It sounds like for yourself, as you've gotten older, you've relinquished control. You've kind of let go a little bit. Was that a hard? Go ahead.
I guess there were periods of time when that was hard. Because you get used to your role as the one in control. You get used to it.
Right.
And then you have to get unused to that. You have to go to a certain point. You have to, and it's not, there's no clear line, that says, okay, this is where I go, I'm not in
Right.
control anymore. It just kind of happens. And there is a struggle. I mean, this struggle goes on and on. There's if you're into psychology and personality development and all that stuff, you realize that there are certain themes. So you're a child, then you're the adolescent trying to establish your own personality, and then you're the husband and father, and then you're the parent struggling against teenagers who are repeating your thing of trying to establish their own personality and et cetera, et cetera. And then you're a long way from it, so don't even worry about it now, but you'll get there.
Right.
You start becoming the aging person who's not quite up with what's going on. This is from the
Mm.
perspective of children and their friends. And then you become kind of the aging person who's losing it, who doesn't seem quite rational and sensible. So you kind of reverse the roles eventually. I mean, right now, part of the, I'm sure you're viewing your children as, okay, well, these are, lovely little wild creatures that are trying to figure out what the world is. And, I need to give them enough space to develop, but at the same time, I got to protect them and, give them a few guidelines and all that stuff. Well, as you start getting older, your children start worrying about you.
Right.
Well, I mean, is he okay living on his own now? Is he really taking care of himself? Whatever. And there's good reason for that. I mean, people do get old, and dementia and Alzheimer's is now no secret.
Right.
And people do have health problems, and particularly males are famous for ignoring health issues. So, so that's why it's really good to read a lot of really good literature.
That's what I try to do to keep myself sane. Now, when your parents were where you are now, right? So your parents
Mhm.
are where you are now. What was going on in your head with your parents? Were you experiencing the same thing that your children were experiencing right now? In this
Well,
sort of
I haven't quite got to the crescendo yet, and I'm hoping to put it off for at least 5 years and hopefully 15 years. But there's no doubt that I'm making it. There are a lot of changes going on with me, and I'm becoming increasingly more interior.
what do you mean by that?
I mean, I need fewer things, but more time
Hmm.
to myself, and I'm literally going interior. It's like, and it may have to do with the seemingly high degrees of peculiarness going on in the world right now. But I want to spend a lot of time actually exploring the inside of myself,
Right.
and sleeping and napping is becoming more important, not just as something to refresh myself, but as another world. People tend to think that all it's good for is, you go to sleep and then you can wake up and you got the energy to go out and do the really important stuff in the waking day. But slowly but surely, I'm kind of going like, you know, I just want to sit here. I want to close my eyes. I want to look at what colors and shapes, like now, not all the time. That would get that would get too much pressure. But now I, close my eyes and begin to see that there's all kinds of really artistic and interesting things going on the inside of my eyelids. And that just with a little muscle twitch, it'll set off crescendos of stuff.
Are you able to
And
control your dreaming?
no, I don't control my dreaming. No,
Okay.
no, 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 no. I can control when I lay down and when I shut my eyes and what I do with that time and how I value it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never been one to, get up and write my dreams down. There's an occasional dream that comes through as that world communicating with this world that I
Your inner
remember.
world communicating with the outer world.
Yeah, but for
Right.
the most part, they're kind of separate worlds, and I respect that separateness. And I basically say, well, what's going on in my dreams? That's in that world, and I don't have to try to catch them. Which is not to say other people can't do that. I know there's lots of people that constantly write down their dreams, and they're always trying. But I don't do that unless the dream comes to me, and occasionally a dream comes to me, and they say, "Remember this.
Okay.
This is not just a dream related to that inside world. This is a dream that's related to the outside world. So remember this."
Well, you know what I named this? Something about tunnels. I forget the name I gave this, but anyways, tunnels. And it sounds like this dream world is trying to tunnel into the waking world. They're trying to create a bridge. Because my next question was, what is the meridians, like the boundaries for you between the inner world and the outer world? Where do you kind of draw that line? Is it in sleep?
That's one of those unknown things, in
Right.
my opinion. It's a continuum type thing.
Hmm.
Like if I'm sitting at my desk in front of my computer and I kind of lay back into the chair and close my eyes, you know, which world am I in? Or am I in an in-between state? And but I try not to. Well, not that I try not to. I just don't think it's important to always have strict definitions.
Right. And why not?
We're not titrating substances that could be medicine or poison depending upon the concentrations. And I personally I like to avoid those types of situations as much as possible.
Of
Like,
it being
I like lots
black and
of
white.
breathing. Yeah, I try to stay away from things where making the distinction is really important for someone's health, well-being, or life. Try
Right.
to stay away from that. I try to, there's the expression of the do easy. And if you haven't seen it, I think it was, oh God, I can't remember the name. The guy who made Drugstore Cow, Gus Van Sant, yeah, made a movie with William Burroughs called Do Easy. I believe it's called Do Easy. It's a lovely little, very short film about an old man using everything he does in his daily life to try to figure out how to do it a little bit easier, a little bit more aesthetically,
Do you think that's almost like the metaphor for life? I mean, right now in my life, it can seem like, like there's like what's the old expression? I'm like a button on a shithouse door, like
Yeah, right, right,
you're so
right.
stuck in the here and now, and what you're describing to me is like the power of stillness. Like it's almost you, what you're describing to me sounds quite monastic almost.
Well, it could be monastic. For an older person who spends a lot of time for it by himself, it's a kind of, you know, I forget the expression. There's an old Japanese book, a little small book about a monk who's living in a little simple wooden room and watching the moon and listening to the trees and seeing the flowers, bloom and wilt and hear the animal sounds and all that. So it can be kind of monastic, but in many cases, you'll find sometimes with your children. Tell me, you have one, two,
One here and one on the way.
okay, and the one here is how old?
She's 2 and 3 months. 2 and 3 months.
Okay, well
You can hear her now.
yeah, well you may notice that sometimes she's going to get wound up and spinning out of control, and if you can just kind of coax her to come and sit in your lap. She may be squirmy at first. I mean, sometimes this doesn't work, but eventually she just kind of.
I
And I always learn particularly with the little ones. I run through a litany. Okay, so when has this little person last taken a nap? When has this little person last eaten something? When has this little person, had something to drink or had their, sometimes even into the twos, they're still in diapers. So it's all you got to go through and figure out the practical stuff. And then, if there's a lot of whining, moaning, stuffing going on, it's like, well, are they expressing independence, or are they actually just asking me to pay attention to them?
yeah.
Because a lot of time is just paying attention to them. And with another one on the way, that could become even more of a thing. So, for
Juggling.
example, we had three children,
Yeah.
and the first child got everybody's attention, but particularly had mama's attention. And then the second child came along, and I had to start taking over more of the first child.
I, I'm preparing myself for a similar fate.
Yeah, well, it's a good fate, but it is a learning experience. And it's. Do you have brothers and sisters yourself?
I do. It's kind of an interesting story. I mean, after my dad passed, many of my experiences made me feel like I was kind of. I'm just saying how it made me feel. I'm not saying the facts, but the feeling
Okay.
was that of an only child. Oh, I would imagine was that of an only child, feeling quite isolated.
Mm-hmm. How when did your father pass? How old were you?
Well, I was 14, and but even
Oh,
before that, my parents they worked a lot, so I was raised by I had a nanny when I was younger, right, from the
mm-hmm.
Philippines, and
Oh,
my
okay.
mom went back to school and things like that. So
Right.
my experiences being my own, they were interesting and unique, right? So there was a lot of time by myself.
Yeah.
So being around people all the time is actually something I would say I'm less used to
Mm-hmm.
than the majority of my formative years. And when I was in my teens and my 20s, I would go hang out with people and I would be the loudest person there. People are like,
Mhm.
man, he's such high energy and he's so like he has such a good time. The reality was, and I wasn't even aware of it. You mentioned observation, is
Mhm.
that I had been, you know, cooped up in my cage, and then I got out to play, and I'm like a little border collie. I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, right,
yeah, 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 yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I
and
understand. Yeah.
right. And now as I get older, I'm like, it's almost like I'm coming back to that sort of interior place because I get to experience, being around people and my
Mhm.
daughter, and I'm learning I enjoy my solace. Like I said, I used to go
Mhm.
out and, party, because that's just,
Right, right, right. Hey, where's the action?
yeah, exactly.
Just sitting
They call
around
it
is
fear.
it's freaking boring. I
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
go find somebody and do something. I'm
And what
wasting my.
Right. And what's the easiest way to do that, right? Because one thing that I've really looked at is addiction. And what's the easiest way to have a good time? Alcohol, drugs and alcohol. It's easy. I'm not saying it's the best or the
Right,
healthfuliest,
right, right.
but
Hmm.
I'd say it's the easiest to tap into a very euphoric, cerebral,
An altered state of mind, I
and
believe is the
altered
term.
state of mind, right? And the body loves an altered state of mind. Why else would we sleep or meditate?
We do like contrast.
We we need it, I think, to break away from the
Well, we
banality.
need contrast, but as you said before, we can also reach a point where we need to just kind of, hey, let's bring all this in now for a while.
It's like if you went to Vegas for a week, right? Like not to live in Vegas, but to go to Vegas, or you went to New Orleans for a week, which
Mhm.
I've done both, which is why I'm bringing this up.
Yeah.
But you can only it's like you can only eat cake and drink beer for so long until you're like, fuck, I want a salad, right?
Well, you know what the expression in our family has always been. There's even such thing as too much sushi.
Oscar Wilde said everything in moderation, including moderation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So in your own life, I mean, like I said, when I met you, I was just like, this sounds like a guy I just want to listen to. And you shared that, literature has been one of your great passions. When did literature, when did you fall in love with reading and learning? Because that seems to be your love, is reading, learning, growing as a person.
Yeah. Well, once again, in my family, the dynamics were I lived in a nuclear family. My mother and father were from different cultures, and I could draw a piece of paper and, put a line in the middle, and I
Yeah.
could go down and, city girl, country girl, military, civilian life, engineer, artist, religion, atheist, you know, etc.
Your
Addiction.
parents were atheists.
No, my mother had always had a tendency towards fundamentalism, and
Hmm.
my father was a non-practicing um, Russian Jew. He didn't practice religion,
Mm.
but he got all the other stuff about studying and working hard and taking care of the family and all that kind of stuff. So and then my only sibling was my brother Doug, a year younger than I was. He was born a year and a week after I was born with mental and physical problems. His mental
Mm.
problem was Down syndrome, and he had, as I understand it, some heart issues when he was born. So immediately, my mother's attention had to shift course.
Right.
And after my parents were informed that my brother had Down syndrome and had these medical problems, that threw them into a tailwind. And my father, who had some psychological issues and drinking issues before, became even more so that way. So he would drink a lot. And then my mother would relieve her stress through socializing when she could, movies, and buying stuff. Okay. So there would be conflicts about this stuff.
Right. Money, drinking.
Yeah, the money, but really wasn't a money problem. It was just, my father was, he grew up in the Depression. His father lost a bunch of money, and things were tough, and he was a college student, a New York highly technical, successful student who got a scholarship to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, but he was Jewish, and this was during the time of the Ku Klux Klan. So he was hanging out with a Chinese student. That was his best friend through all this, a Chinese student, and they were on the co-op plan, which meant that you go to school for one semester and then you work for one semester, and they were living on hot dogs. So, you know, money was a big deal. Um, but my mother, her father was professional military. And say what you want, uh, even in the Great Depression, military people got paid.
Right.
Not a lot. And they had a place to live. And they had a discount store called the Commissary or the PX, Post Exchange, where they could go in. So, she didn't suffer as much during the Depression as he did. But nevertheless, the story of this is just kind of illuminate some of their conflicts. And then my father, because of whatever, he would work hard all day, and then after he'd go directly down to the club bar. And by the time he got home, you know, he would either go to bed or he was probably angry about something.
Right.
So vocal arguments was a feature of the house. And to this day, I don't like arguments. I'm willing to discuss things, but if there's an argument going on and it's not resolved pretty quickly through reason and discussion, it's like I'm out of here.
When I'm feeling, in an anxious space or a lot of conflict, I start to feel it in my chest. So I have to kind of, which is interesting because my dad died of lung cancer. So, right, my chest, that was what got him. Stress.
Did he smoke?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was like, there's a number of other factors here, but it's just something that we become hyper aware of, right?
Yeah, right. I'm aware of that. My wife died of lung problems, and so anytime I feel a little catch in my lungs, it's kind of like, what's going on here? And I was a smoker. I was a heavy smoker for 40 years.
But for me, yeah, when I'm in an anxious situation, that's my clue in. I can feel it, like I've learned to kind of read my body a little bit better, because I used to be, who's behind the driver wheel? I don't know if I was. So I would kind of just react and respond to situations versus to kind of like, okay, I just need to and it's a lot easier, by the way, when you're a counselor and these problems are distanced from you. Like when I'm talking to other people, it's not my problem. But if I'm having an argument with, somebody who I love,
that's a tough one.
Exactly. That's when I need to breathe. Now, where am I going with this? So yes, that for me, conflict, I try to be the peacemaker, and I'm learning to become a little bit better with that. Now, this is where I was going with this. When you
Okay.
see conflict, where would you feel it in your body?
I'd become just generally tense all
Mm.
over, and it's almost like my head is buzzing.
Mm. So it goes from your head to the rest of your body.
No, my head is part of it, but it's also
Right.
it's expressed in a lot of my body. And I just kind of just generally, if I cannot physically just get up and, let's say it's in a room, if I cannot just physically get up and walk out of the room, I literally just go boop,
Mm.
interior, and boop, lower the doors, so to speak.
Like vacant?
And, hmm?
Like vacant? You become like vacant?
Yeah, it's like I'm distancing myself. I think body wise, I'm just kind of saying, you know, we'll talk about this when you're ready to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the
Mm.
meantime, if you're just gonna, yell and scream at me,
Berate you. Yeah.
and berate, I'm just gonna withdraw.
Right. Shut down.
You know, and it's interesting. I mean, because of course it'll call through certain responses. My wife had a pretty. She was famous for her temper, and always had been. Even before, long before I met her, she was famous for her temper. She was the youngest of five
Mm.
by far. I think her nearest sibling was like 7 years older, and so she was everybody's little doll in the family, and she just got tired of it, and so she would just fight back. Okay,
That was her form of resistance. Yeah.
that was her form of resistance, and so it's very important. I don't think you need to get real Freudian about it. As a matter of fact, I kind of prefer the Fritz Perl, Paul Goodman, Ralph Hefferline approach. But you got to go back and explore to a certain extent your reactions and how they relate to your early family experiences. Because a lot of what, and I could be wrong. Hey, I may be very wrong. But I think a lot of my wife's interpretation of my behavior tended to be stuff that was left over or that was still continuing on from her relationship, particularly with her father.
So when did you find your escape? So it sounds like literature was an escape from the not to use a loaded word here, but the chaos, say, of your upbringing. Was that where the love of literature
It
comes
was
in?
an escape and an attempt to understand it.
Okay. To understand.
So
Mhm.
to understand, why do people act this way? You know, why do people do these things? And remember, I lived in a colony. I lived in a corporate colony run by Standard Oil, New Jersey,
Whoa.
and we
Was
lived
there
behind.
was there like a lot of double speak there or something or
Well, of course, there was a lot of double speak. It was a corporate world, and there was a hierarchy, a very clear hierarchy expressed in housing. It was all right there, and it was a small colony. I don't know how many hundreds of houses, can't remember now, maybe 300 houses,
Mm.
and only the Europeans and the Americans, white I should add, lived
Right.
in here, and we had a barbed wire fence going around it, and then there was the outside. We lived on the inside. All those other people lived on the outside. And just as I grew more conscious, it just seemed to me like my mother would like to say, why can't we be like other families? Why can't we be like normal families?
Hmm.
Okay, that worked pretty well until I got old enough that I actually would go over and spend time at my friend's house, and sometimes spend the night at a friend's house and realize, oh fuck, this shit goes on everywhere. Oh, excuse me.
You can.
Okay.
We're not PG. Just because there's a child in the background doesn't mean you can't say fuck. Uh,
Okay.
so
Okay. So anyway, the point was I learned, my mother's fantasy that everybody else was living sweet and normal lives was just nonsense.
okay, there's so many amazing things here. So you're talking about here they are on the inside and the people on the outside, but you being this your corporate housing, it's still you guys were on the outside of another inside, and then in your
Yeah.
family, you were on the outside of your parents, right?
Right.
It's there's a similar like nature is repeating its is nature
Yeah. It's a
mimicking
there's a there as above, far so below, and it's all different type things, but it was
right.
all involved separation and conflict of one sort or another. Because on the outside is where the colored people lived
Sure.
and where the poor people lived.
Yeah.
But on the inside, there were relatively poor people also.
Right.
So,
But these meridians gave the real and the false sense of superiority or whatever. Like this kind of, oh well, it's we're not like your mom said, why can't we be like a normal family? Therein suggesting or assuming that normal really exists. It sounds like it was
normal really exists, and that normal, quote, normal is better.
right.
Yeah.
Well, you I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, I know I'm not normal, and I wear that with a badge of honor. And you think about what happens to the human body when it represses its true self
Oh, it expresses that whatever the repression is.
in myriad ways that are adverse to
In myriad ways. Maybe not as one to one as some people think. But
right.
I spent some time studying Oriental medicine, and
Hmm.
of course they have a whole thing there. In fact, if you ever get a hold of Leon Hammer's book, maybe get a used copy of Leon Hammer's book. What is it? Dragon. Hammer was a Western medical guy who got into Chinese medicine. I'll get it to you later, but it's really interesting, and there's a lot of Chinese literature that talks about the relationship between physical and the mental and the spiritual, and it's kind of fun. Don't take it entirely seriously,
Well, and the
but
Tao tells us that too.
the basic thrust, I think, is true.
Hmm.
And I mean, Wilhelm Reich did all this stuff also, and his disciple Alexander Lowen, if you're familiar with them at all. And I think that to a certain extent, Gabor Mate gets into this.
Yeah. Well, I am noticing a shift in that. Like it seems like we're going from a centralized, we have all the answers to this intuitive way of understanding. You were mentioning before, and you even talk about the process of life. Like we go from trying to, think that we have all the answers as parents to relinquishing control and going back into this sort of ourselves sort of thing. And I think that that's representative of what I'm doing too. I'm starting to sort of relinquish, and I'm 32. I mean, might be a little soon, but I wonder if maybe that's like the zeitgeist, if you will, of this period of time that we're living in. Or
we're living, yeah. We're living in a very interesting time, which is probably, I'm making a real wild stab at this, but this has been on my mind recently. Well, up until the First World War, like particularly in the United Kingdom and in France and Europe, we had this rationalism in science. And we were, I'm putting a we in this. I wasn't obviously not alive at the time, but we were going to come up with the answers.
Right.
Through technology, through science, we were going to.
We believed in technology.
Right. And
especially
then,
in Britain in the 19th century.
Especially in Britain. Britain made a big deal out of this. It was one of their justifications for going around the world and basically colonizing.
Yeah.
Well, was that they were going to save the people through rationality and science and technology. And yeah, we had to kill a bunch of them, but that's only because they won't listen to us.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so the Europeans had this whole thing going. I mean, the French were involved with it, Germans were involved with it, even the Dutch had a huge empire. And then they fell to killing each other by the millions. World War I.
Yes.
Total shock. Total shock. In addition to literally killing a considerable percentage of young males, for example, in England, there was a dearth of marriageable males for a long time. It really destroyed the conceit that we are humans, we are the Homo sapiens, we are making progress, we are going to rationalize, and
we're going to think our way through this.
We're going to think our way through this. Exactly. And that's why you had all these really interesting art movements that really started rising out of the ground, the Dadaist and the Surrealist and the, avant-garde of all different kinds, and James Joyce. Okay? Because it was obvious that, once again, I'll use the royal we, as in America, United Kingdom, and Europe. It was obviously we didn't have the answers. That we were actually pretty barbaric. It's just our barbarism amongst ourselves was expressed only in short flashes, short meaning 4 or 5 years, called world wars. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the time we go around pretending that we got it under control, and it's kind of like the person who acts like they never get angry and they're always happy, and
right. And we know that's bullshit.
And well, we know that's bullshit, and that then all of a sudden they'll flare up and strike out and raise all kinds of havoc.
Right.
Well, so we're going through a similar period now. This is not a world war, but we're going through this really weird period now where everything is in doubt. And in the middle of this doubt are people pretending that they know what the the problem and the answers are, and they're fighting with other people who are pretending that they know what the answers are. And it's
Is it going to be the first person to say, I don't know what's happening here? Like a leader to just come out and say, like, I humbly have no idea what the fuck is going on, but I'm not
what if
going anywhere. Like, what is
yeah,
it going to take to get us out of this? Right now, what we're fighting, and I
you
like what
won't
you
like
say.
my answer. You won't like
Okay.
my answer.
Okay. Let's hear it.
You will not like my answer.
Okay.
What anybody who wants to make the world a better place and to get beyond this, because this will end.
Mhm.
But unless something happens that I don't know what it is right now, I'm afraid that those with the most fire in their belly are going to come back into power. And they're going to wreak even more havoc. And so the best strategy for individuals and families is to prepare for a minor cataclysm. You know, I mean, I'm going to go vote. Every day I do look at the news. Today I posted some things about the Omicron variant, and I said these are people that I've been studying for years. I think that they've got as good a fix on what's going on right now as anybody. Um, you know, my personal strategy is I'm going back and I'm going to lay low for 2 or 3 weeks because what we do know is this thing is going to spread like wildfire. What we don't know is what that means.
And we're not pretending anymore. We don't know the effects of this thing.
Well, a lot of people are pretending. They're saying, "Oh, well, this is going to be much easier," and this is going to be, and that may be true.
Yeah.
But so what I'm trying to say is, we're not going to kumbaya our way into
No.
a better world at this point. There are too many um, ignorant powers and selfish powers loose in the world. And I'm afraid that they're going to that they will come back into power. I hope I'm wrong. And that they're going to become even more extreme and to the point where enough people are going to look around and say, man, these people are really wacko.
Mm.
And there'll be enough of a coalition that hopefully then there will be some people that can step to the fore and can say, well, here, here's a few answers we can try.
Right.
We can't guarantee that they're going to work. We know what's been happening recently is not working. Things are kind of crashing down around us. But here's a few things we can try. And we should approach it as, let's try this out. If it produces good results, let's try it out a little bit more. If it doesn't produce the results that we thought it would, let's see if we can modify it or we can try something else.
You know what I think, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. And dude, an hour's gone by. I can't believe that. Anyways, so would you be down to do this again?
Another time? Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So here's what I think is a bit of the problem is just, okay, services, disservices. When I go around the world and I talk to people and I just have conversations with them and I try to meet them where they're at,
Yeah.
conversation goes well, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking. On the
Mm-hmm.
internet, doesn't go so well. There's a lot of tribalism on the internet. But when you isolate the member of the tribe, you got a good shot of having a good conversation with people on very different ends of the spectrum. But when you try to like one man and walk up and speak to the tribe and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" You're going to get
Yes.
stones thrown at you, and you
Right.
will be killed, right, in one way or another.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of priming that's been going on. Yeah.
So it's like for me, my solution has been I just have turned it off. I try not to look at the news. When people tell me things, it's usually like they're like, "Have you heard this?" I'm like, "No, but you're about to tell me," right?
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's ignorance is bliss, but I'm trying a different approach. And I find that news and so much stuff on the internet, McLuhan's taught me this. Step back and just look at what the medium's doing. Don't look at the content, don't look at the message. What is it just doing to you? How is it affecting you?
Right.
What
Right.
are the hidden psychic effects of this day and age right now? And god damn, we don't need to look too far to know what the hidden psychic effects are. Mania. We're getting amped up. But if
Exactly.
we
But the hidden side, the hidden psychic effects in this particular instance are not hidden. We're just ignoring them. So, for
right.
example, the trick is like I do look at the news,
Yeah.
but I have a particular way of doing it. I had a Twitter account for years, and I ran a little thing, and I found biologists and philosophers and political people and news people that I've paid attention to, and I kind of have a stable of pretty good experts. So I'll do that, but it's when I find myself kind of vibrating and getting tenser and tenser. It's just like, you know what, fuck this. I'm not going to
Mm.
save the world today. I'm going to go.
Right.
I'm going to go read a book. I'm going to go to another Sweeney's or Jerry Fialka, literature discussion group because that makes me feel good. I'm growing. You know, I'm learning things. I'm you know, learning the wider perspective from these other people, and I think I'm helping them also. So I'm going to do some more of that, but I'm not going to give up on the news. So, like today, it's like Omicron. So, my long suffering girlfriend, for the in 2020, I told her I just gotten back from Japan. I saw COVID coming. I was back in the States for 2 weeks when this big music festival in Austin was canceled. It was the first big event canceled. And I said, Kimi, pack your bags. We're going to the
We're digging
countryside.
in. Yeah.
We're digging in. I've already ordered a bunch of, basic stuff. And so I thought, well, we're going to go do that for a couple months and people gonna wake up and this thing will be solved. And we were out there for 14 months.
Is the
Finally we
earth
got uh-huh.
is the earth trying to tell us something?
Yes. Yes, there's no doubt about it. The earth is the system. The people talk about God or Jesus talking to them. Well, hey, it gets pretty clear when you have this unrelenting series of events that just seems to go on and on and on and keeps amping up more and more and more. So, but to get back to the thing is, I watch the news for practical reasons.
Right.
So I told Kimi today, she's running some Airbnb stuff, and I said, if I were you, I would not accept any new guest for the next 2 weeks.
Mm.
Just don't do it. We got this new thing. It may actually end up being kind of good news, but we gotta somebody else coming into the action here. I'll make it quick. We may have kind of good news, but I've myself in through my news reading said need to take a couple weeks, step back as much as possible, stay away, let a little more data accumulate, and find out if it's as benign. Like we're both fully vaccinated and have boosters and have. What we got? All right. So when
That's
you
my
just let
dog.
me know, that's your dog.
Yeah. Kona.
Woof,
Here.
woof, woof, woof,
Well,
woof.
one thing that's resonating is let's not pretend. Let's find out, right? Let's not pretend we have the answers. Let's
Yeah,
figure out what the answers are.
right. Exactly.
Duncan, thank you so much. I'm going to end it there because I'm getting like 3 people calling me behind me. So speaking of paying attention, here's a lesson. Pay attention to what's going on around you.
Exactly.
Don't just
All
listen
right.
inside. It's the balance of the in and the out.
Exactly.
And not always having clear meridians and distinctions of what is what, but following your intuition.
Mhm. Okay. Bye bye.
Duncan, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Okay.
Onward.